Hello everyone. Please tell me, which city are you listening from? What time is it there? I had been walking down the street for what felt like hours. The day had dragged on, everything about it moving too slowly, and I just wanted to get home. The streets were quiet for a city at this time of day, the usual hum of traffic subdued by the thick, overcast sky. The usual rush of people was nowhere to be seen. It was strange, but not completely out of the ordinary. Maybe people were avoiding the weather, or perhaps it was just one of those days where the city felt more like a ghost town than a place full of life. I passed the usual storefronts, the same familiar buildings, each block blurring into the next. The sound of my footsteps echoed in the emptiness, adding a layer of unease that I couldn't shake. I was on autopilot, not paying much attention, just walking. My mind was somewhere else, my thoughts scattered, trying to make sense of the day. That's when I saw it, a billboard. I had passed it 100 times, but this time, something caught my eye. It was the usual advertisement, a smiling woman promoting some perfume, but the image flickered for a split second. I didn't think much of it at first, assuming it was just a malfunction, but then it happened again. The flicker wasn't just a technical glitch, it was like something shifted in the image. The smiling woman was replaced. No, my face appeared. I stopped walking, my breath catching in my throat. It wasn't a clear, full shot of my face. Not exactly, but it was me. I could tell. The eyes, the jawline, the way the shadows played on the face, everything about it screamed that it was mine. But there was something off. The eyes didn't look like mine. They were too wide, too hollow, almost as though they were staring right through me. And the expression, it wasn't mine. It was frozen, unnatural, as if it was a picture of someone, yes, but not someone alive. I stood there for a moment, too stunned to move, my feet glued to the sidewalk. The billboard flickered again, and suddenly, my face was gone. The woman with the perfume was back, smiling as though nothing had happened. I blinked, unsure if I had imagined it, but no. The image of my face had been there, as clear as day. I took a hesitant step forward, my heart still racing, my mind trying to process what I had seen. Maybe I was just tired, maybe I had been imagining things, but the feeling that something was wrong wouldn't leave me. I couldn't shake the image of my face, cold and lifeless, staring back at me from the massive screen. I quickened my pace, wanting to put some distance between myself and the billboard. My thoughts were a jumble, spinning around in my head. I turned the corner onto the next street, trying to focus on the path ahead, but my eyes kept darting back to the glowing screen, as though it was pulling me back. It happened again. The moment I looked up, the billboard was showing my face, not an image of me smiling, not a photograph. My actual face, staring back at me with those wide, empty eyes. The same lifeless expression, frozen in place. I stopped. My feet rooted to the pavement. The billboard was following me, showing my face like it was waiting for me to notice, waiting for me to see it again. I turned away quickly, but the image of my face stayed with me. I could feel it, like a presence in the back of my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that the billboard was alive, that it was trying to communicate something, trying to tell me something I didn't want to hear. I broke into a jog, desperate to leave the strange, cold image behind. But no matter how fast I moved, No matter how many turns I took, I couldn't escape it. Every street I walked down, every corner I turned, I saw that same face, frozen, staring, watching me. I stumbled into an alley, gasping for air, trying to clear my head. But when I glanced up, there it was again. The billboard, looming over the alleyway, showing my face, my eyes, wide, empty, unblinking. I had to get out of here. I had to leave. I turned back, heading toward the main road, trying to shake off the panic that was rising in my chest. I couldn't explain it. It didn't make sense. I had to be losing my mind, but the feeling of being watched didn't leave. The eyes, those hollow, lifeless eyes, kept following me everywhere I went. I tried to take a deep breath to calm myself down, but my legs felt weak, like I was being pulled into a nightmare I couldn't escape. The sky had darkened even more, and the streets, once so familiar, now seemed unfamiliar, twisted somehow. Every shadow seemed to stretch unnaturally, the quiet of the city too thick. My reflection in the windows seemed wrong. The buildings around me loomed larger, their edges more jagged. I reached the main street again, but the billboard was still there, standing above the crowd, waiting. I looked up, and this time, it wasn't just my face. It was everyone's face. The crowd was reflected in the screen, their expressions twisted, their eyes just like mine, wide, vacant, lifeless. I saw the people walking past me, their faces flicker in the glow of the screen. Their eyes were empty, just like mine. I looked down, horrified, but the faces were still there, still waiting on the billboard. Frozen in place, their gazes locked with mine. I turned away again, my breath short and fast, my mind unraveling, and that's when I realized something terrifying. I couldn't see my own reflection anymore. It wasn't that I wasn't looking at it, was just gone. The windows I passed by, the doors, the mirrors, they were all showing nothing. No image, no reflection, just empty glass. I tried to scream, but the sound didn't come out. I ran again, as fast as I could, but it was no use. Every corner, every street led back to that same place. The billboard, the eyes, the cold, empty stare that followed me wherever I went. I stopped. I turned around slowly, knowing what I would see. The screen flickered one more time, and I looked up, bracing myself. But it wasn't just my face anymore. It was myself, my reflection, but not me. It was standing right there, at the edge of the crowd, and I wasn't the one looking at it. It was an ordinary evening, the kind of night that's filled with the usual rush of people heading home from work, the hum of distant traffic, the chatter of pedestrians, the soft glow of neon signs. I was walking through the city, the sounds of the street enveloping me as I navigated the busy sidewalks. The crowd was thick, people moving in every direction, their faces blurring in the noise and movement. I didn't need to be anywhere in particular. I was just out, wandering. I often found comfort in the noise of the crowd, in the movement of the city. It was easier to exist when you weren't alone. I pulled my coat tighter against the evening chill and adjusted my scarf, my feet following the familiar route home. But tonight something felt off. I couldn't quite place it at first. The crowd was moving as it always did, the usual rush of bodies heading in all directions. But there was something in the air, a sense of discomfort, a slight unease that crept in, almost imperceptible, yet ever present. It was the way people moved around me too quickly, too distracted. It felt as though everyone was avoiding me, or maybe it was the other way around. I brushed it off as nothing, just a passing feeling, and kept walking. That's when I saw her. She was walking toward me. One person in a sea of others. At first it was a simple thing, a brief glance as our paths crossed. But then I noticed her eyes were empty. I'm not talking about tired or vacant. Those are words we use for people lost in thought. People who've seen too much. People who haven't slept. No, her eyes were empty in a way I can't quite explain. There was nothing in them, no depth, no life. They were wide open, but they didn't reflect anything. They were just dark, hollow spaces, staring right through me. It wasn't as though I had imagined it. I had seen her clearly, her face framed by the soft glow of a nearby street lamp, her hair falling over her shoulders, her clothes ordinary, a simple jacket, jeans and boots. She blended in perfectly with the crowd, no different from the others. Yet her eyes stood out like nothing else. They were unnatural, wrong. I blinked, a chill running down my spine. For a moment, I didn't know what to do. I felt my legs freeze, my body unable to move as she passed by me, brushing so close that I could feel the air shift with her presence. It was brief, just a moment, a few seconds at most, but those seconds stretched on, hanging in the air, thick and suffocating. I stood there, still, as she continued walking, blending back into the crowd. Her steps were steady, her pace unhurried, like she was just another person going about their evening. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I turned to look after her, but the crowd had swallowed her up, and she was gone. I kept walking, my steps quickening now, my heart racing in my chest. I didn't know why, but I felt an overwhelming sense of urgency. The city around me seemed to grow darker, the faces of the people in the crowd now blurring together, their expressions becoming unreadable, like shadows beneath the streetlights. I could hear the distant murmur of conversation, but it felt far away, like the sound was coming from somewhere else, from somewhere I wasn't a part of. I turned a corner and walked faster, trying to shake the feeling of being watched, but no matter how much I tried, I couldn't get the image of her eyes out of my head. I reached the next block, passing more faces, more people. The city felt like it was closing in on me, the noise of it too much, too heavy. And then, just as I was about to cross the street, I saw her again. She was walking toward me, right through the crowd, and she was looking at me. Her eyes were still empty. It was her, the same woman. But this time, I was sure she was looking at me, her hollow gaze locked onto mine as she moved through the crowd, as if she had been waiting for me to notice her. There was no mistake this time. I could see her clearly, her face now unmistakable. She was walking slowly, methodically, the crowd partying around her as though they were unaware of her presence. I felt my heart pound in my chest, my throat dry, my legs frozen in place. She didn't stop walking, didn't change her pace, but I could feel the weight of her gaze on me as she passed by again. Her eyes, they were darker this time. The emptiness in them was deeper, more suffocating. I wanted to turn away, but I couldn't. My feet wouldn't move. I couldn't tear my gaze from her, from the vacant expression on her face, the hollow eyes that seemed to pierce right through me. She was gone in an instant, swallowed by the crowd once more, but the feeling lingered, that awful feeling of being watched. It wasn't just her gaze though. It was something else's presence, a weight, like something was following me, lingering just out of sight, but never far enough to let go. I didn't know what to do, didn't know why this was happening, why she was following me. It felt like I was in some kind of dream, a nightmare, where things didn't add up, where reality was bending in on itself. I tried to shake it off, to keep walking, to get home, to put the whole thing out of my mind. But every time I turned a corner, I kept expecting to see her again. Every time I passed another person, I felt like I was being watched. The unease never left me. I couldn't escape it. I didn't know how long I had been walking at that point, but when I finally reached my apartment building, I was out of breath, my body trembling with the anxiety I couldn't shake. I entered the building, the familiar buzz of the elevator, soothing for a moment, but that moment didn't last. The feeling of her eyes, those empty, hollow eyes, was still with me. It was as though she was still there, watching me, following me, waiting for me. I pressed the button for my floor, the familiar hum of the elevator moving upward, but then I felt it again, the weight of someone's presence. I turned around, and there she was, standing at the end of the hallway, just outside the elevator doors, her coat blending with the shadows, her hair falling softly around her face. She didn't move, she didn't speak, but I knew without a doubt that she was waiting for me. And her eyes, those empty, hollow eyes, were staring right at me. The tunnel always felt the same, whether it was day or night. It was dark, cold, and quiet. The kind of place that gave you an unsettling feeling as soon as you stepped inside. It wasn't a particularly long tunnel, just a small underpass that cut through the hill near my apartment. People used it all the time. It connected to neighborhoods, one side to the other. It wasn't dangerous, at least not in any way anyone could easily point out. But every time I walked through, there was something about it that made me feel off. Like there was something wrong with it, though I couldn't say what it was. That night, I had taken the same route as usual, just trying to get home after another long day at work. I had always avoided taking the tunnel after dark, mostly because the streetlights inside flickered and buzzed too much, making the air feel thick and oppressive. But that night, for some reason, I didn't think twice. It was late, yes, but I was tired, and the alternative route would have added a good 20 minutes to my walk. I approached the entrance, and as usual, the darkness inside stretched out like an invitation. The pavement leading to the tunnel was wet, reflecting the streetlights above. I could hear the distant sound of cars passing, their engines humming softly in the background, but the air around the tunnel was still, almost too still. I stepped inside, and the sound of the outside world faded into a muffled silence. The tunnel was narrow, its walls lined with damp bricks, their rough texture visible even in the dim light. The only illumination came from a few old, flickering streetlights embedded in the ceiling, casting long, uneven shadows that danced unnaturally along the walls. The air smelled stale, like it had been trapped here for years. The kind of smell that sticks in your throat. I walked forward, my footsteps echoing off the walls in the silence. It wasn't long before I felt a thick feeling that something was wrong. It wasn't just the silence or the shadows. It was something deeper, like the tunnel itself was pressing in on me, squeezing the air from my lungs, making it hard to breathe. I quickened my pace, trying to shake off the feeling of unease that crept over me, but with each step, the tunnel seemed to stretch on longer. The walls narrowing around me, the air growing heavier. The sound of my footsteps echoed too loudly, now almost mocking in its emptiness. I glanced over my shoulder, the feeling of being followed, of something being behind me, washing over me. But when I looked back, I saw only the long stretch of darkness behind me. Nothing was there. Still, I couldn't shake the sensation that I wasn't alone. I took another step forward, and that's when I heard it. A soft whisper, coming from somewhere just beyond the reach of my hearing. It was barely audible, a breathy sound that made my blood run cold. I stopped dead in my tracks, my heart pounding in my chest. The whisper didn't sound like a person. It was too soft, too distant. But it was there, unmistakable. You're not supposed to be here. I stood there, frozen, my mind racing. There was no one behind me, no one around, and yet the voice seemed to come from the very air itself. I turned, half expecting to see someone standing behind me, but the tunnel was empty. The shadows hung motionless, the walls silent. I tried to laugh it off, telling myself I was just imagining things. I had to keep moving. I couldn't stand in the middle of the tunnel like an idiot. I resumed walking, this time faster, but the whisper came again, closer this time, clearer. You shouldn't have come this way. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't understand what was happening. I wanted to scream, to turn around and run back the way I came, but the air felt thicker now, suffocating, like something was blocking my way. I forced myself to keep moving, my pace quickening, desperate to escape the sense of growing dread that had settled in my chest. As I walked, the walls of the tunnel seemed to close in. The flickering streetlights above buzzed, louder, casting longer, more grotesque shadows that twisted as I passed beneath them. My skin prickled, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I could feel something watching me, waiting for me to slip. I glanced behind me once more, but this time, there was something different. The tunnel behind me was gone. I froze again. The entrance, the familiar streetlights, the exit I had walked through just moments ago, was gone. The tunnel behind me was a solid wall. No door, no opening, just smooth stone where the opening should have been. My chest tightened, panic beginning to rise as I took a step back. I was trapped. The walls around me seemed to be closing in, the air growing colder and thicker. I reached out, my hand trembling as I touched the wall, but instead of the cold stone, it felt wrong. The surface wasn't smooth anymore. It was soft, like fabric or flesh. I jerked my hand away, stumbling backward, but when I looked up, I saw that the walls weren't just closing in, they were moving. The walls, the ceiling, the floor, they were shifting, bending, like the tunnel itself was alive, reshaping its space to trap me in it. The dim light above flickered, casting long, jerky shadows, as though the light was struggling to stay on, struggling to exist in this place. I felt my breath catch in my throat. I couldn't breathe. I needed to leave. I turned again, hoping to see the exit reappear, but there was nothing. There was no way out. The tunnel had swallowed me whole, and now it was changing around me. I was being pulled into something I couldn't understand, something that shouldn't be happening. And then, just as the walls seemed to move in so close that I couldn't move at all, I heard it again. You should never have entered. The voice was louder this time, closer, as if it were coming from every direction at once. I didn't know where it was coming from, or who it belonged to, but I could feel it. It was all around me now, pressing in, suffocating me. The darkness seemed to grow, creeping from the edges, filling the space, devouring the light. And just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, I heard something. The sound of footsteps. At first I thought it was my own, but then I realized they weren't in sync with mine. The footsteps were coming from ahead, coming toward me, deliberate, slow, heavy. I couldn't see anyone, but the sound grew louder, the footsteps matching my pace, always just a step ahead. They weren't behind me this time, they were in front of me. I stopped again, heart pounding, unsure of what to do. The footsteps paused with me. But then, I heard Ita's voice, low and whispering, coming from the very air around me. You can't leave. I didn't wait to hear anything else. I turned and ran, not caring where I was going, not caring what was ahead. I just ran. My legs burned as I stumbled over the uneven floor, my breath ragged in my chest. The walls pressed in closer, but I didn't stop, not even when I heard the footsteps quicken, keeping pace with mine. They were always there, always ahead, waiting for me to stop. But I couldn't stop. I didn't stop. And then, just as I thought I might collapse, I reached the end of the tunnel. Or at least, I thought I had. The light up ahead flickered as I ran toward it, but as I reached the opening, I stopped dead. It wasn't the end of the tunnel at all. It was another beginning. I had gone in circles. I was still in the same place. It had been a long day, the kind where everything felt just a little too much, too many hours, too many faces, too much noise. I had been working late, and now I was waiting for the bus to take me home. It was already past midnight. The city streets eerily quiet. The usual bustle of traffic replaced by a heavy stillness that hung in the air. The streetlights cast long shadows across the pavement, the flickering of one or two overhead giving everything a strange, stuttering glow. The bus stop was empty, as usual at this hour. There was no one around, save for a few people who passed by, walking quickly, their footsteps echoing off the pavement before they disappeared into the shadows. I pulled my jacket tighter around me, a slight chill in the air that seemed to seep into my bones. The night felt heavy, pressing in from all sides, as though the darkness itself was waiting for something. I checked the time on my phone. The bus should have been here by now. It was late, sure, but it usually ran on time, especially for the last few routes of the night. I stood there for a few minutes, staring down the empty street. Nothing. I checked my watch again, impatience creeping in. The bus should have been here. I could hear the distant sound of traffic from the main road, but the street I stood on was unnervingly quiet, as though everything had slowed to a stop. Just as I was about to pull out my phone again, I heard the faint hum of an engine in the distance, growing louder as it came closer. The bus. Finally, I looked down the street. And sure enough, I saw its headlights slowly round the corner. It was moving unusually slow, almost gliding down the road. It felt wrong to slow, too deliberate, but I didn't think much of it. After all, it was late, and buses sometimes moved slower after hours, the drivers likely tired. I stepped forward, my hand already reaching for the pole to signal the bus to stop. But as it neared, something made me hesitate. I don't know what it was, just a strange feeling, a nagging instinct telling me something wasn't right. The bus was still too quiet. It didn't make any of the usual sounds you'd expect. The hiss of the brakes, the hum of the engine, the flicker of the lights. There was only the soft, steady roll of the tires on the pavement, almost like it was moving silently through the street, as if it wasn't fully part of this world. I shook my head, trying to brush off the unease. But as the bus pulled up to the stop, it didn't stop. It didn't slow down, didn't hesitate, just kept going, gliding smoothly past me without a sound. I blinked, taken aback, my heart skipping a beat as the bus seemed to pass through the stop, the doors never opening, the lights never flickering. I stood there, frozen, watching the bus disappear into the dark, my breath caught in my throat. It didn't make sense. It couldn't make sense. I knew I had seen it come down the street, seen it get close. But now it was gone. And the street was empty again. I stood still for a moment, unsure of what to do. Should I wait for the next one? Should I walk instead? I could see the glow of the next street lamp up ahead, but I didn't want to walk down the empty street in the dark. The next bus would be here soon enough, I thought. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. A shiver ran down my spine, and I found myself looking down the street, hoping to see the bus coming back, hoping for something that would make sense of it all. That's when I saw her. She was standing at the stop, just beyond where I had been standing. Facing me, she wasn't moving, just standing there in the dim light, her figure cloaked in shadow. Her face was obscured, but I could feel her eyes on me, a steady weight on my skin, like she was waiting for me. I don't know how I hadn't noticed her before. She wasn't there when I had arrived at the stop, and she certainly hadn't been there when I had been looking down the street. Yet now, she was standing just a few feet away from me, completely still. I took a step back, a chill creeping into my bones, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. There was something wrong about her, something unnatural in the way she stood there, motionless. Her clothes were simple, just a long coat, a scarf wrapped tightly around her neck, and boots that disappeared into the shadows of the pavement. But her face? I couldn't make it out, couldn't see any details, but I could feel the weight of her gaze. I should have said something, but my voice caught in my throat. She didn't move, didn't speak. She just stood there, watching me. The silence stretched on, thick and heavy. I glanced around, trying to dismiss the discomfort that was growing inside me. There was no one else around. No cars, no noise. Just me and her in the stillness of the night. I glanced down at my phone again, half expecting to see a message. Something to pull me out of this strange moment. But there was nothing. The sound of tires on asphalt broke the silence. I looked up, and in the distance, I saw the bus again. It was coming from the same direction, slowly, silently, just like before, but this time, as it neared the stop, I didn't hesitate. I walked toward it, determined to get on. It didn't matter that I had just seen it pass by. It didn't matter that the woman was still standing there, still watching me, her presence like a weight pressing on my chest. I needed to get on. I needed to leave this place. The bus pulled up, and the doors opened, just like they were supposed to. The interior was empty, the lights flickering slightly, but it was the same bus. The same bus that had passed me just moments ago. I stepped on without looking back, and there she was. The woman. She was standing at the back of the bus, her face still obscured, her eyes fixed on me. But this time, she wasn't standing still. She was moving toward me, her footsteps too quiet, too deliberate, as if she had always been there, as if she belonged. I stumbled backward, the air and the bus thick with an oppressive silence. The doors had closed behind me, and the bus was moving again, but it wasn't moving forward. It was moving away from the city, away from everything familiar. I looked at the driver, but the seat was empty. No one was behind the wheel, and that's when I heard her voice. Soft, hollow, but clear. "I've been waiting for you." I turned to run, to get off, but the doors wouldn't open. The windows were dark, the outside world swallowed by the night. I was trapped in that silent bus, heading toward an unknown destination, and all I could do was watch her slowly walk toward me. It was late, too late for me to still be walking, but I had lingered longer than I should have, distracted by the thoughts that wouldn't let go. The streets were mostly quiet, save for the occasional car passing by or the soft rustle of the wind moving through the trees. It wasn't unusual for the night to feel heavy, but tonight there was something more about the air, something pressing. The shadows seemed deeper, the darkness more absolute, as if the world were holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I had been walking for a while, taking the long way home always, the long way when my thoughts got the best of me. I wasn't in a hurry. I liked the quiet of the streets at night, the solitude. But tonight, as I made my way down the familiar road, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Not exactly. I wasn't hearing footsteps, but I felt them following me, or at least, that's how it seemed. I tried to brush it off, chalking it up to the heavy silence of the night, the kind that plays tricks on your mind. But as I neared my building, that feeling intensified. A coldness crept over me, making my skin prickle, like I was being watched by something I couldn't see. My steps quickened, but I couldn't shake the unease that had settled in my chest. I reached the door of my apartment building and stopped in front of it, fumbling for my keys. The lights in the hallway were dim, casting long shadows that stretched unnaturally across the walls. It felt too quiet, too empty. I glanced around, half expecting to see someone, anyone, walking in the hallway, but the place was empty. It always was at this time of night. I finally found my key and pushed the door open. The moment I stepped inside, I felt it. The air was different, heavier. It smelled stale, almost like something had been closed off for too long. I hadn't noticed it before, but now it hit me as soon as I entered the building. I shook my head, trying to dismiss the thought, but it lingered. The faintest sound reached my ears like a door creaking somewhere far down the hallway. I hesitated. It wasn't like the building was huge, but the long, narrow hallway felt like it stretched endlessly. The dim light at the far end casting a soft glow that seemed to shrink with each step I took. There were no voices, no sounds of movement. The building was as empty as I expected it to be. I stepped forward, the feeling of being watched growing stronger, pressing in on me. I walked slowly down the hall, the darkness at the end seeming to stretch and bend with each passing moment, as though the space itself were warping. When I reached the door to my apartment, I paused. Something was wrong. The air was thicker here, almost suffocating. I glanced at the door, then at the hallway again. I couldn't place it, but there was a sense of disorientation. The hallway felt narrower, the shadows darker than they had been when I walked in. I turned the doorknob and pushed the door open, and that's when I saw her. She was standing in the doorway. At first I thought it was me, just my tired reflection in the glass. But no, it was her, standing in the doorway of my apartment, facing the dark hallway. Her hair was long, flowing around her shoulders in waves, and her figure was still, as though she were frozen in place. She didn't move, didn't blink. But it wasn't just the fact that she was there that unnerved me. It was her shadow. Her shadow stretched out behind her on the other side of the door. I blinked, trying to make sense of it. I wasn't sure how to explain it. The shadow was completely detached from her, as though the door had become a transparent surface, casting her reflection, or maybe it wasn't her reflection at all. The shadow moved differently, as if it had its own life, its own path, creeping across the floor like it was separate from her. I took a step back, my breath catching in my throat. The shadow twisted unnaturally as it crawled toward the opposite wall, moving in a way that defied the way she stood. It didn't follow her movements, it wasn't in sync with her at all. It was as if the shadow was drawn to something in the room, something hidden in the dark that I couldn't see. I felt a coldness in the room, a chill that crept over my skin, like I was standing at the edge of a nightmare. I couldn't move. I just stood there, staring at the doorway, my heart racing in my chest, unsure of what to do. I wanted to turn and run. I wanted to scream, but my voice was caught in my throat. The woman, if that's what she was, didn't move. She stood perfectly still, her face half hidden by the dark shadows that surrounded her. The room was silent, except for the faint creaking sound, the sound of the door still gently moving on its hinges. I didn't know how long I stood there, unable to move, my eyes fixed on the woman and her twisted shadow. Finally, I forced myself to take a step forward, towards her. My hand was shaking as I reached out toward the doorframe, my fingers brushing against the cold wood. That's when I saw her eyes. She wasn't facing me, not completely, but her eyes. They were watching me. They were wide, unblinking, and empty. There was no recognition in them, just an emptiness that stretched on forever, as though there was nothing behind them but darkness. I stumbled back, my heart hammering in my chest. I didn't understand what was happening. I couldn't explain it. My legs felt like they were made of stone, frozen in place as I watched the woman's figure slowly disappear into the darkness of my apartment. But the shadow didn't disappear. It lingered, still stretching across the floor, creeping toward me, separate from her. I turned and fled, slamming the door behind me. The sound of the door clicking shut was deafening in the silence. But as I leaned against the wall, trying to steady my breath, I felt something shift in the air. The whisper came then, soft but clear. "Come inside." I couldn't tell where it came from, but I didn't need to. I knew that the voice wasn't mine, and it wasn't the woman's either. It came from something darker, something more sinister, hiding in the shadows that now seemed to stretch endlessly before me. I knew, with an overwhelming certainty, that whatever had been standing in my doorway wasn't just a person. It was something that had crossed a boundary, something that belonged to a place where shadows and reality no longer followed the same rules, and I couldn't escape it. It was late, far later than I had planned to be out, but I found myself walking the streets anyway. The air was cool, with a slight bite to it that made me pull my jacket tighter around me. I was just a few blocks from home, but for some reason, the quiet of the night felt unnervingly isolating. The city was usually alive at this hour, distant car horns, late-night walkers, a few stragglers on their way home, but tonight it was eerily still. The streets were empty. The usual background noise seemed muted, almost as if the world had slowed down. I walked faster, eager to reach the warmth of my apartment, but something about the emptiness around me unsettled me. The shadows on the sidewalk stretched long in the dim light of the street lamps, and the soft sound of my footsteps echoed back to me in the stillness, adding to the growing discomfort in the pit of my stomach. I was almost at the intersection when I heard it. A car, approaching from behind, its engine humming softly, cutting through the silence. I didn't think much of it at first, just another late-night driver, probably in a hurry to get home. But then, as the car drew closer, I noticed something strange. There was no sound of tires on the pavement, no revving engine, nothing but the faint hum. It was wrong. I glanced behind me, instinctively, and saw the headlights coming up fast. The car was close now, and I instinctively quickened my pace, stepping off the curb to get out of the way, thinking the driver hadn't seen me. But as I moved, the car slowed down as well, matching my pace. I sped up, now feeling a distinct sense of unease. The sound of the car's hum remained steady, though there was still no engine roar, no tire squeals. I couldn't shake the feeling that the car was too close, like it was following me rather than just passing by. I looked again, my heart racing. The headlights were shining straight ahead, but the car's body, well, it wasn't right. It was hard to explain, but the shadows around it seemed to twist, like the light was warping, stretching unnaturally. I couldn't see the make or model of the car, only the faint blur of headlights and the distorted outline of the vehicle. I had to get off the street. I turned quickly, heading toward the alley that cut through to the next block. I could hear the tires on the pavement now, that soft humming sound, but it wasn't getting any quieter. The car was still behind me, keeping its pace, following me into the alley. I glanced over my shoulder again, my breath quickening, and saw the headlights still following, still no noise, just that eerie hum. I broke into a sprint, my legs moving faster than they ever had, my heart pounding in my chest. The car did the same. It sped up, just enough to stay right behind me. The headlights seemed to grow brighter, the hum more insistent. But there was no sound of the engine revving, no screech of the tires on the wet asphalt. I reached the end of the alley, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I turned around to face the street, looking for a place to hide, a building to duck into, but the car was still there. It was now close enough that I could see the outline of it, the headlights blinding in the darkness. But it wasn't a car at all. There were no windows, no visible doors, just a dark, featureless shape, the headlights glowing without a source. The car stopped. I stopped too, heart hammering in my chest. I was trembling, confused and terrified. The hum stopped with it. Silence descended over the street. But the headlights didn't turn off. They stayed, focused straight at me, burning into the night. I felt the air grow thick, my pulse quickening. Something about the stillness felt suffocating, like the very air around me had grown too heavy to breathe. I tried to take a step back, but my feet felt glued to the ground. The only sound now was the deep, steady beat of my own heart. And then I heard it. A whisper. It wasn't from the car, but from the air around me. Low, hollow, empty. You can't run from this. I whirled around, but there was no one behind me. The street was as empty as it had been. There was no sound, no movement. Just me, the dark, and the stillness of the night. The car remained in front of me, still and silent. My feet moved before my brain had a chance to react. I bolted, running faster than I ever had in my life, weaving in and out of alleys, down side streets, turning corners at random, my breath shallow and panicked. The footsteps of my own running mixed with that low hum, the sound of the car still behind me, always behind me. I didn't stop running. I didn't dare stop. But no matter how fast I ran, the hum never faded. It stayed with me, close behind, matching my pace, like a shadow that refused to leave. I turned a corner, breath burning in my chest, and finally found a more populated street. People were walking on the sidewalks. Cars passed by, the noise of the city now enveloping me. I slowed, gasping for air. But when I dared to look over my shoulder again, the car wasn't there. The hum was gone. The street was just the city again, normal, bustling, alive. I stood there for a moment, trying to catch my breath, my heart still racing, trying to convince myself that everything was fine, that it was all just in my head. But when I looked at the sidewalk ahead of me, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There, etched into the pavement in dark, wet streaks, were tire tracks. But they weren't like normal tire tracks. These were different. They were deep, too deep, as if something had been dragging along the pavement. And where they ended, the marks disappeared into the crowd of people, fading into nothing. I couldn't take it anymore. I ran, not caring where, just away from the street, away from the people, away from the hum that had followed me just moments before. But even as I ran, I felt it. That presence, the hum, now soft in the distance, but it was still there, still following. It was just after dusk, the kind of evening where the light hangs in the sky like a fading memory. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving the streets bathed in the soft, fading glow of streetlights. I had been walking for what felt like hours, trying to shake off the heaviness of the day, and decided to take the long way home. The park was a short detour, a peaceful stretch of green I passed by every day. But tonight it felt like the right place to stop and take a breath. I approached the entrance to the park, the tall iron gates looming in front of me. Normally, the park would still be open at this hour. People would be walking their dogs, or maybe sitting on the benches, lost in conversation. But tonight, the gates were locked, the sign on the entrance clearly stating, "Park closed after dusk." It struck me as strange, but not unusual. Maybe there was some kind of event or maintenance going on. Regardless, I wasn't planning to go in, just wanted to walk along the edge of it for a few minutes, where the path ran parallel to the park, I had always found something calming about being near it, even if I couldn't step inside. But tonight, as I walked alongside the locked gates, something felt off. The air was heavier than it should have been, thick with humidity, almost suffocating. The silence of the street seemed deeper than usual, more oppressive, like the night itself was holding its breath. That's when I heard it. The sound of children laughing. At first I thought it was just the wind playing tricks on me, the soft rustling of the leaves making an eerie noise that mimicked voices. But no, it wasn't the wind. It was unmistakable. The laughter, high-pitched and carefree, was clear as day, and it was coming from inside the park. I paused, my heart skipping a beat. The park was supposed to be closed. There was no way children should be inside, especially at this hour. My mind raced, thinking of the possible explanations. Maybe it was just some late-night event, something I didn't know about. But the longer I stood there, listening, the more wrong it felt. I walked closer to the fence. My curiosity piqued despite the growing sense of unease. The laughter was now mixed with the faint sound of children playing, running, shouting, their feet slapping against the ground in rhythmic patterns. It sounded like a normal game, the kind of innocent play I used to hear when I was a child. But something in the way the laughter echoed in the stillness of the evening felt off. It was too sharp, too unsettling. I reached the corner of the park, where the fence seemed to fade into shadow, the light of the streetlights barely reaching it. I could still hear the children, their voices growing louder now, clearer. It was as if they were getting closer. But the park was still locked. I turned my head, trying to find the source of the sound, but there was no one on the other side of the gate. I stood there for a moment, my pulse quickening. The laughter didn't stop, but something about it felt wrong, almost unnatural. It wasn't just the sound of children playing. It was the way they sounded, the way the laughter echoed with an eerie, hollow quality, as though it were coming from somewhere deep in the earth. My skin crawled, and I took a step back, unsure of what to do. I was about to turn and leave when I heard a voice, a child's voice, clear and sweet, calling from the darkness beyond the fence. "Come, play with us." My breath caught in my throat. The voice was soft, inviting, but it sent a chill through me. I could feel my heart pounding against my chest. Who was that? And why had they spoken to me? I hadn't seen anyone, no figures, no shapes, just the sounds. I glanced at the locked gates again, the shadows creeping in where the light couldn't reach. The park was still empty, the streets silent except for the laughter. I should have turned away, I should have walked back to the main road, but I couldn't. I was rooted to the spot, my feet unwilling to move. The laughter, the voices, it felt like they were pulling me in. Something was wrong, but I couldn't look away. The voice came again, louder this time, more insistent. "Come play with us, we're waiting." Without thinking, I reached out, my fingers brushing against the cold iron of the fence. The laughter seemed to echo in the air, bouncing off the metal, filling the space around me with a sense of impending dread. I felt the hairs on my neck stand up, a wave of nausea sweeping over me. But as I stood there, listening, something shifted. The sound of laughter didn't just stop, it changed. It became frantic, a cacophony of voices blending into a maddened, unsettling rhythm. It wasn't the joyful sound of children playing anymore. Now it was distorted, warped, like something was manipulating the sound, turning it into something unrecognizable, something frightening. I stepped back, my heart racing. I didn't understand. This wasn't right. The laughter, the voices were getting louder, more frantic, as though they were surrounding me, closing in. And then, through the thick darkness of the park, I saw them, figures, barely visible in the shadow, moving just behind the fence. They were small, hunched, their shapes blurry and indistinct, like shadows that had taken form. I couldn't make out their features, but I could see them moving, shifting between the trees, darting back and forth in ways that felt wrong, unnatural. They weren't walking, they were skittering like insects. The laughter reached a deafening pitch, and the figures moved closer, edging toward the fence. I could see the outline of their faces now, pale and distorted, their eyes too wide, their mouths stretching into grins that didn't belong on human faces. The sounds of play had become screams, mixed with that same frantic laughter. I stumbled back, my body shaking, trying to break free from whatever had me locked in place. I turned to run, but the world seemed to blur around me. The park stretched on, the fence growing taller, the shadows deeper, until the sound of the laughter was all I could hear, filling my ears, pounding against my skull. I ran. I didn't know where I was going, just away from that place, away from the twisted figures, away from the voices that now screamed for me to join them. But as I ran, the laughter didn't fade. It followed me. Every step I took, every corner I turned, it was there echoing, surrounding me, calling my name. And the deeper I ran into the night, the further I tried to escape, the more I realized the truth. The park had never been closed. It had always been open, but it wasn't the park I knew. And those children, those voices, they weren't real. And I wasn't supposed to leave. I had always prided myself on knowing the city. After living there for years, I knew its streets, its neighborhoods, the best shortcuts, the hidden spots that most people never found. But one evening, after a particularly long day at work, I found myself driving through unfamiliar streets, trying to get to a part of town I hadn't visited in a while. I had taken the wrong turn somewhere, lost in my thoughts, and now I was trying to navigate my way back. I was getting frustrated. The street signs were unfamiliar. The cityscape seemed to blur as I passed through unfamiliar intersections, and the usual landmarks I relied on were nowhere to be found. I should have recognized where I was by now, but nothing seemed right. The roads didn't match the map in my head. I pulled up to a stop sign at a crossroad, looking left and right, trying to figure out where I had gone wrong. That's when I saw her. She was standing at the corner of the street, just standing there, as if she had been waiting for me. She was a woman, dressed in a long coat, her hair tucked neatly under a hat. She looked ordinary enough, but there was something about the way she stood there, so still, that made me pause. I looked up at the sign nearby, but the street name didn't ring a bell. I had no idea where I was. She must have noticed my confusion because she approached the car with a warm, almost serene smile. "Lost?" she asked, her voice kind and calm, like she was used to helping people like me. I nodded, feeling embarrassed for not recognizing the area. "Yeah, actually, I'm trying to get to the main road. Do you know which way it is?" Without hesitation, she leaned down to my window, her smile never wavering. "Turn right up ahead, then keep straight for a few blocks. You'll hit the city center soon enough." It's easy to get turned around in this area." I thanked her, feeling a small sense of relief. It was nice to have someone offer directions without making me feel like an idiot. I followed her instructions, turning right and driving straight ahead, the streetlights now casting a strange glow across the asphalt. But as I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. The streets seemed unfamiliar in a way that made my stomach twist with unease. I'd been through this neighborhood before, or something similar, but the didn't match my memory. The architecture was different, the buildings too narrow, the streets too quiet. I didn't recognize any of the businesses or landmarks that should have been here. I kept driving, the city growing stranger by the minute, and finally, I reached what she had said would be the city center. But when I turned onto the main road, the landscape ahead was completely foreign. The towering buildings, the busy streets I should have recognized were gone. Instead, there were houses, small stores with strange names, and a quiet stillness that unsettled me. I stopped the car, staring out at the unfamiliar surroundings, feeling a sense of panic creep up on me. The woman had told me this was the city center, but it didn't look like the city at all. There were no signs of life here, no busy roads, no shops I recognized. I rolled down the window, trying to get a better sense of where I was, but there was nothing, just the faint glow of streetlights and the sense that the world around me had shifted in some inexplicable way. I checked my phone for directions, but the map didn't show anything. It was just a blank screen. I tried to call someone, anyone, but the call wouldn't go through. The signal was gone. I was trapped in a place that didn't exist on any map, surrounded by buildings I didn't recognize, and the streets didn't lead anywhere familiar. That's when I heard the footsteps. They were soft at first, faint, like someone walking in the distance, but they grew louder, closer. I turned to look, half expecting to see the woman who had given me directions, but she wasn't there. Instead, there was a man walking toward me from the other side of the street. He was tall, dressed in a dark coat, his face obscured by shadows. I couldn't make out his features, but there was something unsettling about his presence. He walked slowly, methodically, as if he were waiting for me to notice him. My heart began to race. I didn't know what to do. I started the car, my hands shaking as I gripped the wheel, but I couldn't bring myself to drive. Something held me in place, something that told me this wasn't just a wrong turn. It was more than that. I wasn't supposed to be here. I wasn't supposed to be anywhere here. The man kept walking, his footsteps now so close that I could hear them on the pavement, each one echoing in the silence of the empty streets. And then, as if he could sense my fear, he stopped. He didn't speak, didn't move. He just stood there, looking at me, his shadow stretching across the ground, casting a dark figure on the pavement. I didn't wait to see what he would do next. I slammed my foot on the gas pedal and sped away, my eyes darting back to the rearview mirror to see if he was following me. But the streets were empty again. There was no sign of the man, no one in sight. I kept driving, not caring where I went, just wanting to escape the suffocating feeling that had settled over me. The streets twisted and turned, every corner I made leading me farther into the unknown, deeper into a city that didn't belong. The further I went, the more distorted everything became. The houses grew older, the streetlights dimmer. The buildings looked less and less like what I knew, and more like some forgotten part of a dream. I passed by rows of houses that seemed abandoned, their windows dark and empty, their doors ajar. I turned another corner, and the streets I had been driving on for what felt like hours suddenly faded into mist, swallowed by the darkness. The city I thought I knew had disappeared, leaving behind something strange, something that didn't feel like home. I stopped the car again, panic rising in my chest. I had been driving for so long, but I couldn't find my way back. The city had swallowed me whole, and there was no way out. The street signs were unfamiliar, the buildings wrong, and the silence was so heavy, like it was watching me, waiting for me to realize that I wasn't in the right place. I sat there, paralyzed, staring out the windshield. And that's when I saw it. A figure in the distance, standing under a streetlight, just like before. The woman, she was standing there, watching me. I couldn't bring myself to move. I couldn't bring myself to leave. Her presence felt like the final piece of a puzzle that I wasn't meant to solve, a game that had been rigged from the beginning. I felt the pull of it, the inevitability of being here, and in that moment, I realized something that made my heart stop cold. I wasn't in the wrong city. I was in a city that didn't exist, and I had been led here by someone who knew exactly what was waiting for me. It had been a long day, the kind where everything seemed to blur together, the hours slipping by with no clear distinction between one moment and the next. I was tired, exhausted really, and just looking forward to getting home. The city felt different at night, still quiet, almost unnaturally so. The streets weren't as busy as usual, the hum of the city more like a distant memory. The world around me seemed to hold its breath as I walked down the empty sidewalk. As I passed through a quiet street, I glanced up at the familiar window of a small shop I often walked past on my way home. The lights were dim inside, casting a faint glow on the glass. I didn't need to stop, but I found myself drawn to the reflection in the window. I saw myself, but not quite like I remembered. At first, everything looked normal. The image in the glass mirrored my movements, the slight sway of my body as I walked. But then something shifted, something that made my breath catch in my throat. My reflection wasn't moving in sync with me. I stopped walking, my eyes glued to the glass. My reflection, for just a moment, stood still. It held the same pose I had, but its expression was wrong. I could see it clearly. Now my reflection was no longer mimicking me. It was like watching someone else stand in my place, as if it had a life of its own. The face, which I had seen 1,000 times before, seemed unfamiliar, distant. The eyes in the reflection were wide open, staring back at me, but they weren't mine. They were hollow, empty. I blinked, trying to shake the feeling off, but when I opened my eyes, my reflection hadn't changed. It was still standing there, motionless. And then, in the quiet of the night, I felt something I couldn't explain, a sense of wrongness. My heart began to race. I reached out, almost as if to touch the glass, but I pulled my hand back before I could. Something about the reflection, no, about myself, felt out of place, like I was looking at someone who wasn't me. The thought, simple as it was, sent a cold shiver up my spine. I had never felt like this before, never had this sense of being detached from myself, like I wasn't in control of my own reflection. I tried to move again, stepping away from the window, but my reflection remained in place, staring back at me. My feet froze to the ground. The reflection didn't follow. It stayed unmoving, just staring. It wasn't just the eyes. It was the way it held itself, like it was waiting for something, or worse, like it was watching me. I turned quickly, walking away from the window with purpose, my heart pounding in my chest. The sensation of being watched didn't leave, though. The street around me felt emptier, as if the air itself had become more suffocating, thicker. Couldn't shake the feeling of being out of sync, of being followed by something that wasn't really there. It was like I had left part of myself behind in that reflection, and I couldn't move on without it. I glanced back over my shoulder, hoping to calm myself with the sight of the quiet street. But no, the feeling of unease hadn't faded. In fact, it was worse now. The street felt too long, the shadows too deep. And just then, I saw something that made my stomach drop. My reflection was still standing there. I stopped dead in my tracks. It wasn't in the window anymore, it was outside. The reflection was standing on the sidewalk behind me, the same unmoving figure I had seen before. I could see it clearly now, in the dim light, standing in perfect stillness as I watched it from a distance. It was me, but it wasn't. The reflection had stepped out from the glass, out from the confines of the shop, and was standing motionless on the same street where I was. I tried to move, but my legs felt heavy, like I was wading through thick water. My breath came in shallow gasps, panic rising in my chest as I tried to comprehend what was happening. My reflection myself was now behind me, on the same street, doing nothing but staring. I took a step forward, and my reflection mirrored it only. It stayed in place, standing still, unmoving. I stopped again, and the reflection stayed in place, its eyes following me as I shifted. It wasn't mimicking my movements anymore. It was just watching. I took another step, a trembling hand reaching for my phone, my fingers shaking. One had to get out of there. I had to leave. But before I could look away, the reflection in the window did something that made my blood run cold. It smiled. The smile was wide, unnaturally so. It stretched too far, too wide across the face, and it wasn't my smile. The eyes remained cold. But the smile, that twisted, unnatural smile, was like something from a nightmare, something that wasn't supposed to be attached to my face. I stumbled back, my phone now forgotten in my hand. I didn't know how to explain what I was seeing. It didn't make sense. My body moved without my will now, taking me farther down the street, away from the reflection, away from the thing, the person that was following me. But no matter how far I walked, I couldn't escape the feeling of it being there. It was still with me. I turned another corner, trying to get out of sight. But when I glanced over my shoulder again, I saw the same figure, my reflection standing under the lamp post ahead. The smile was still there, but now, it wasn't the only thing that unnerved me. It wasn't just the smile. It was the way it was moving. The reflection was now walking towards me. I turned and ran. I could hear the footsteps of my reflection behind me, keeping pace with my own. Every turn I made, every alley I slipped into, my reflection followed. It didn't run. It didn't chase. It walked, steady, deliberate, keeping perfect pace. I didn't stop until I reached my apartment building. I rushed through the front door, fumbling with the keys in my hand, my fingers cold and slick with sweat. My mind was spinning. The image of the reflection in the window still burned into my vision. And that smile was still imprinted in my mind. I didn't dare look back, not even for a moment. I slammed the door shut behind me, locking it with trembling hands. I stood there for a long time, listening to the silence. But the silence was broken. A soft, faint scratching noise. It was coming from the other side of the door. I didn't want to look. I didn't want to know what it was. But I felt compelled to, as though some invisible force was drawing me toward it. I turned, and when I looked through the peephole, saw the reflection standing in the hallway, staring at the door. Its head tilted to one side, as though it were waiting for me to open the door. And then, just like before, it smiled. It was late, far later than I had planned to be out. The city felt quieter than usual, as though it were waiting for something I couldn't quite place. The usual buzz of late-night traffic and distant conversations was absent. There were no cars on the street, no pedestrians. Just me, walking along the empty sidewalk. The streetlights flickered above, casting long, uneven shadows on the pavement. I had always liked walking at night. There was something comforting about it, the solitude and the quiet. But tonight, as I walked down the familiar path home, something felt off. The air felt thicker, like it was pressing against me, weighing me down. And though the street was empty, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I passed by the old buildings on either side, their windows dark and lifeless. The occasional tree swaying gently in the breeze. The street seemed to stretch on endlessly, the road lined with empty storefronts and forgotten corners. It was a peaceful, if eerie, silence that hung in the air, broken only by the soft shuffle of my footsteps on the pavement. But then I heard it. Footsteps. At first I thought it was my mind playing tricks on me. After all, I had been walking alone for so long, and the sound of my own feet was probably amplifying in the quiet. But no, it wasn't just my footsteps I was hearing. It was someone else's footsteps, coming from behind me. The sound was faint at first, barely audible, but it was their soft, rhythmic, echoing in the empty street. I turned around quickly, my heart skipping a beat, but the street behind me was still empty. No one, nothing. I took a deep breath, trying to shake off the feeling. My imagination was running wild, I told myself. It was just the quiet of the night, playing tricks on me. I turned back around and kept walking, the sound of my footsteps mixing with the distant echoes of the other set of footsteps. But the footsteps were still there. They hadn't stopped. I paused again, listening more intently now. The sound was unmistakable. Someone was walking behind me, just a few steps away. Their pace was steady, deliberate, as though they were keeping up with me. But every time I turned around, there was no one. Not a soul. The street remained just as empty as before. No sign of anyone else. I quickened my pace, my heart beginning to race, the silence of the street pressing in on me. The footsteps followed suit, keeping pace with mine, never speeding up, never slowing down. It was as though someone were walking in perfect synchronization with me, step for step, without ever getting closer or further away. I glanced over my shoulder again, still nothing. The street was completely deserted. This wasn't just a strange coincidence anymore. I could feel it. Whoever or whatever was behind me was aware of me. The air around me seemed to grow colder, and a chill ran down my spine as I started walking faster, my footsteps echoing more urgently. The footsteps behind me sped up too, matching my stride perfectly. I wanted to turn around, to confront whoever. It was following me, but something in me told me not to. Something told me that if I looked back, I would see something I wasn't ready to see. And then, just as I was about to break into a run, the footsteps stopped. I froze, the sudden silence deafening in comparison to the steady rhythm that had been trailing me. My breath was shallow, my chest tight with fear. I didn't dare look back this time, but the silence felt different now, heavier. I stood there for a long moment, not moving, listening intently. The street around me was completely still, not a single sound except for my own rapid breathing. I turned around, there was nothing. No one, the street was as empty as it had been when I first entered it. The streetlights flickered once more, casting eerie shadows, and I could see the faint glint of wet pavement reflecting the dim light. I shook my head, my pulse still racing. It had to be my imagination. I had to be imagining things, right? But the feeling of being watched didn't go away. I hesitated, unsure of what to do next, but something pushed me forward, a need to leave the street behind and get home. I started walking again, this time slower, trying to steady my breathing, and that's when I heard it. The footsteps started again. This time, they were closer, too close. The sound was sharp, distinct. Behind me, I whipped around, and there it was. A shadow. It wasn't a person. It wasn't an object. It was just a shadow, shifting unnaturally in the dim light, stretching across the pavement in ways that didn't make sense. It moved as though it were separate from the environment, like it didn't belong. It wasn't tied to any physical form. It was a dark shape, reaching toward me, and I could feel it closing the distance between us. I stumbled backward, my heart racing, my mind struggling to comprehend what I was seeing. The shadow didn't have a face, didn't have a body. It was just there, growing bigger, getting closer with each step I took. The footsteps behind me continued, still in perfect rhythm with mine, but the shadow was what held my attention. Started running. The shadow didn't follow, but the footsteps didn't stop either. They followed me, faster now, picking up pace, drawing nearer with every frantic step I took. I ran faster, but no matter how fast I went, no matter how far I pushed myself, the footsteps stayed right behind me. They weren't just footsteps anymore. They were like a presence, a weight in the air, pressing down on me, as if something was chasing me. I reached the next intersection and turned the corner, but the footsteps were still with me, still trailing in the dark. My legs were burning, my breath ragged, but the sound of the footsteps wouldn't let up. They were there, always there. Finally, I reached a busier street, the noise of traffic breaking through the tension, and I stopped, gasping for air. I looked around, and the footsteps stopped with me. The street was crowded now, people passing by without a second glance. But I couldn't shake the feeling. I turned around, looking over my shoulder. The shadow was gone. The footsteps had stopped. But I could still feel it, whatever it was, watching me, waiting. The darkness in the room was absolute. It wasn't the kind of darkness that you could get used to, the kind you might find during a power outage, where after a few minutes your eyes adjust, and you can begin to make out shapes. No, this was different. This was a darkness that swallowed everything, even the faintest light. It felt as though the walls themselves were pressing in, closing tighter with each passing second. And yet, I knew I wasn't alone. I didn't want to be in that room. It wasn't that I was afraid of the dark. No, it was the silence. The suffocating silence that came with the absence of sound. I had been sitting in the same chair for what felt like hours, my mind racing, my body paralyzed by the heaviness of the air around me. I had lost track of time. How long had it been since I turned the lights off? Minutes? Hours? I couldn't say. I had gone to bed earlier, as I always did, hoping for some rest after a long day. But sleep hadn't come. The usual stillness of the night had felt wrong, somehow. A strange unease had settled over me, a feeling I couldn't explain. I tried to push it aside, tried to convince myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But it wasn't just that. It was the whispers. At first, I had thought it was just the wind, or perhaps the neighbors talking through the walls. But then the whispers had become clearer, sharper, and undeniably real. It wasn't the sound of distant voices. It was closer than I had realized. I couldn't understand the words, but I could hear them clearly, drifting through the air, carried by a wind that didn't exist. It felt like someone or something was in the room with me, right behind me, right at the edge of my hearing. I sat up in bed that night, straining to listen. The whispers weren't coming from the window, the door, or any obvious place in the room. They weren't coming from any direction at all. They just were, lingering in the air like the scent of something faint, something elusive. I told myself to ignore it, to go back to sleep. But the whispers grew louder, more insistent, until I couldn't do anything but sit up, frozen in place. "Who's there?" I whispered into the dark, my voice trembling. Nothing answered. I forced myself to get out of bed, my feet cold against the floor as I stood in the pitch-black room. My mind screamed at me to turn on the light, to find the source of the sound, but something stopped me. The darkness felt thick, like a heavy blanket pressing down on me, and the air was too thick to breathe. I walked carefully toward the door, reaching out with my hand to find the handle, but as my fingers brushed against the cool metal, I stopped. The whispers were louder now, more distinct, and unmistakably human. My heart skipped a beat, and I backed away, my breath catching in my throat. They weren't just whispers anymore, they were words. Soft, barely audible words, but words nonetheless. "Don't go, don't leave." The voice was soft, a mere breath against my ear, but it made my skin crawl. It was coming from somewhere close to close. My breath quickened, my eyes darting around the room. But I couldn't see anything. There was nothing but the darkness, stretching out in every direction. I backed away from the door, my pulse racing. "Who are you?" I called out, my voice shaking. The room seemed to close in on me, the air heavier now, almost suffocating. But the whisper didn't stop. It continued, growing fainter and more distant, but always present, always there. "Please don't leave." I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to drown out the voice, but it lingered, scratching at my mind, pulling at me from all angles. The walls seemed to pulse with the sound of it, as though the very room itself was alive with the whisper. I opened my eyes again and looked around. There, in the corner of the room, was a dark shape. My heart slammed in my chest as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. It was there, just beyond the edge of my vision, lurking in the dark. I couldn't make out any details, just a faint outline. A figure, standing still, but I couldn't see its face. Couldn't even tell if it was human. The whisper came again, this time louder, more urgent. "Don't leave me." I froze, my body stiff with fear. I couldn't move, couldn't bring myself to speak. I didn't want to look at it, but I knew that if I didn't, it would get worse. Slowly, painfully, I turned my head to face the corner where the shadow was. But it wasn't there. The space was empty. I blinked, my mind racing to catch up with what had just happened. It was impossible. I had seen it. I had felt it. But now the corner was empty, just as it should have been. There was no figure, no shape, nothing but the dark, oppressive quiet. "Please." The whisper came again, right behind me this time. I spun around, but the room was still empty. No one, no shadow, just the thick, suffocating darkness that surrounded me. I felt my legs buckle beneath me, and I collapsed to the floor, my breathing shallow and rapid. The whispers grew louder, filling my head, scratching at my mind, drowning out everything else. I squeezed my hands over my ears, desperate to shut them out, but it didn't help. The whispers didn't come from the air anymore. They were in my head, echoing inside me, louder and louder. "Please, don't leave me." I could hear the desperation in the voice now, a plea that seemed to come from the very depths of something dark, something that wasn't quite human, wasn't quite alive. I looked around again, my heart racing, but there was nothing. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it. It was closer now, its presence like a cold breath against my neck, its voice piercing through my thoughts, consuming me. The walls of the room seemed to close in, pressing tighter and tighter, until it felt like the room itself was trying to swallow me whole. I stumbled to my feet, desperate to escape, to run, but the door was gone. The hallway beyond was gone. The walls around me shifted, closing in as if the space itself was twisting and contorting, trapping me in the center of it. The whispers grew louder. "Don't leave. Please, don't leave me." I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound came out. The darkness thickened, and I realized something that made my blood run cold. It wasn't just the room that had changed. It was me. I was trapped in the dark, but I wasn't alone anymore. The whisper wasn't coming from the walls, the shadows, or the air. It was coming from inside me. It had been with me all along, waiting for me to notice, waiting for me to hear it. And now, it would never stop. It was one of those nights where the streets seemed quieter than usual. The kind of evening where the city almost felt abandoned, and the air was thick with stillness. I had taken my usual walk after a long day, the same route I always walked when I needed to clear my head. The sidewalks were empty, the sound of my footsteps echoing off the cold pavement. The streetlights flickered above, casting long, stretched shadows along the road. The world felt distant, muted, as though it were holding its breath. I had no particular destination in mind. Just walking, letting the rhythm of the night settle over me, the routine comforting in its familiarity. It was a quiet part of the city-old buildings. A few late-night stores with their lights dimmed, the occasional car passing by. As I walked, I noticed a woman up ahead, standing under the streetlight at the next block. She was dressed in a long coat, her head lowered, and I could see the outline of her face in the dim light. The soft glow of the street lamp illuminating her features just enough to make her seem almost unreal. She didn't seem out of place, but as I drew closer, something about her seemed off. There was an odd stillness to her, an unnatural calm in the way she stood there. I walked past her without a second thought, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I glanced over my shoulder as I continued on, but she was still standing there, unmoving, just beneath the light. I tried to push the thought out of my mind and kept walking. But then, a few blocks later, I saw her again. She was standing in the same spot, this time at the next intersection. Same long coat, same posture, head lowered, her face still obscured by the shadows. This time, I slowed my pace, watching her for a moment. How could she have gotten there so fast? I hadn't seen her cross the street, hadn't heard the sound of footsteps behind me. She was just there. I took a breath and shook my head, dismissing it as a strange coincidence. Maybe I had walked farther than I realized, or maybe she was just a woman out for a late-night stroll. But as I passed her again, I felt the weight of her presence more than ever. It was like she was following me, always just one block ahead, standing motionless, waiting. I turned the corner, trying to clear my mind, but when I looked back, there she was again, a few blocks ahead, just standing there, her head still lowered, her coat fluttering slightly in the breeze. I couldn't understand how she kept showing up. How was she always ahead of me? How could she move without me hearing a thing? My heart rate picked up, a sense of unease creeping over me. There was something about her, something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. I turned around to look back at her again, my mind racing with questions. Had she been following me this whole time? But when I looked behind me, she wasn't there. I stopped dead in my tracks. The street was empty, no sign of her. The sidewalk was still, the dim streetlights casting their cold glow on the empty pavement. I had turned around expecting to see her standing just a few paces behind me, but there was nothing. No woman, no figure in the dark, just the quiet street. Stretching out before me, confused and uneasy, I started walking again, my thoughts swirling in my head. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe I was just tired, my mind playing tricks on me after a long day. I tried to push the thought away, but the feeling of unease only grew stronger. But as I walked, I noticed something that made my stomach twist. She was ahead of me again. I hadn't heard any footsteps, hadn't seen her move, but there she was, standing still in the same spot, just ahead on the next block. My breath caught in my throat as I stopped, staring at her, feeling the world tilt. How could this be happening? How could she be so far ahead when I hadn't seen her move? I froze, my pulse quickening. I couldn't explain it. I turned around again, but this time I didn't look just once. I checked behind me, then back at her. She was still there, standing perfectly still, her head lowered, her figure outlined in the dim streetlight. I turned around once more to continue walking, my steps growing faster now, my anxiety rising. But every time I turned a corner, she was there, standing, waiting, always one block ahead, and no matter how fast I moved, she was always just ahead of me. I tried to convince myself it was a coincidence, that I was just imagining it, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized that it wasn't. I picked up my pace, my breath coming faster now, the rhythmic echo of my footsteps filling the silence around me. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of being followed, even though every time I turned around, she wasn't there. She was ahead, always ahead. I rounded another corner, practically running now, trying to outrun the strange sense of dread that was creeping up on me. But when I looked ahead, I saw her once more. The same position, the same stance, standing still in the same spot. And then, as I reached the next intersection, I turned around one final time. This time, she wasn't ahead. She was behind me. I froze, the blood draining from my face, my heart pounding in my chest. She wasn't standing still anymore. She was moving, walking toward me with deliberate slowness, her head still lowered, her coat swaying slightly with each step. She was getting closer. I backed away, my breath shallow and panicked. But the more I tried to move, the more she closed the distance. The alleyways and streets blurred around me. She wasn't running, wasn't hurrying at all, just walking slowly, methodically, her footsteps growing louder, echoing in the quiet of the night. And with each step she took, I felt my feet sink deeper into the pavement, as though the ground itself was holding me in place. I turned to run again, but this time the street didn't stretch in front of me the way it had before. The buildings seemed to lean in, closing the way, the lights flickering above me as the shadows deepened. I turned back once more to see her. Just a few steps away now, her head still down, her face still hidden, her eyes never meeting mine. And then, as she reached me, her lips barely parted, and I heard her voice, soft and almost lost in the night. "You can't leave. You never will." The world around me began to warp, to stretch, the street dissolving, fading into darkness.